We've seen a lot of reaction to this news story over the course of the week, and that is that the Belfast rap trio Kneecap is now being investigated by counter-terror police in the UK over a number of different clips, 2 clips in particular from previous concerts that they had, in which they said that the only good Tory is a dead Tory. And they also said, "I kill your local MP," and that one is what one member of the band said. And the other one was "Up Hamas" and "Up Hezbollah." Now, to me, the most interesting and the most important thing about Kneecap and this situation, this story, the most distressing thing about this story, is that for over 60 days, not one drop of water, not one ration of food, not one pack of medicine has entered the Gaza Strip. This is the longest blockade in the history of the Gaza Strip. The most outrageous thing I think about the Kneecap story, and the most controversial thing about Kneecap, is that we have in recent weeks seen the IDF kill 15 medics and recovery personnel and relief workers, bulldoze their ambulances and cars, bury them in a mass grave, and imprison their one surviving colleague. I think the most shocking thing about the Kneecap story is what we've seen happen in the city of Rafah, which is now effectively been bulldozed to the ground. And much of the remaining Gaza Strip has been obliterated. The final working hospitals have been cut off from supplies, along with holy sites have been demolished, historic sites have been demolished. Schools, universities, homes are all razed to the ground. The killing of hundreds of journalists, of doctors, tens of thousands of children at this point in time. The most chilling thing I think about the Kneecap situation as well is the breaking of the cease. Since the breaking of the ceasefire by the IDF, the remaining people of Gaza have been forced into 1/3 of the size of the landmass of the Gaza Strip, which is already, remember the start of all this, considered one of the densest populated places in the world, according to the Washington Post. The IDF has seized more and more territory, forcing them away from exclusion zones. And dozens of countries have now gone to the ICJ today and yesterday to protest the withdrawal of aid and the blockade of aid into Gaza, calling it a breach of international law. The Taoiseach going so far as to call it a war crime. But despite all of this, a lot of the news coverage over the last 7 to 8 days, and we can talk about the merits of the discussion, because there is reasons why this has caught on so much. Yeah. But it has to be said, Gavin, a lot of the talk has been about Kneecap, and it has come possibly at the expense of what is happening in Gaza. And
Kneecap are not infallible, and there's things they can be rightly called up on. But it's hard, given all of that and given the timing of the inquiries now into Kneecap, including for some things that they did on camera as far ago as November 2023, that this is something of an instigated pile-on because of the timing of all of this. I mean, they're being partly investigated for things that they said at a gig in November 24, other things that they said in the November 23. There are also now that there's suggestions that they're going to lose or will not get US visas because of something that they said at Coachella recently enough, because of thus the pile-on from Sharon Osbourne. I mean, they performed at Glastonbury last summer, which was televised by the BBC. I imagine they said that they expressed a lot of similar sentiments, maybe with different words, and the world kept on turning. And yet it's now at this particular point when they are raising concerns about it, at the time when the humanitarian crisis in Gaza is perhaps at its most acute of the last 19 months, is the time that they're being called out. Now, I find it's very difficult, firstly because we shouldn't be talking about Kneecap. We should be talking more about the actual realities on the ground. But here we are, and Kneecap have become a kind of a political talking point. Even Micheál Martin being asked about it, which is why he intervened on Monday, which is why we are where we are.
This is the point. Actually, this is the point. Just on Micheál Martin's intervention in this. So he was asked about this on the way into cabinet. Clearly, it was your standard cabinet stakeout. It looked like this to me.
Yeah, there was also a separate press conference on Monday that I was at where he was asked. It was thrown to him by a reporter. It wasn't as if he said, "I have a thing I want to get off my chest." Somebody invited him.
Of course, somebody, a member of the media has to ask that question for it to get a response. This wasn't just Micheál Martin taking a shot across the bow of Kneecap. But he said that he wanted them to urgently clarify their comments, which, it's happened in a statement now. The families of the 2 MPs who have been killed in recent times in the UK, not entirely happy with the apology that was given. We can come to that a little bit later on. But it was interesting that he went there, and Simon Harris, who was also asked clearly the same question, went, "Well, look, we should just be talking about the issues there," which I think was probably more deftly handled. But again, it's just this is where we're at, in that there is such a huge international level of pressure now from governments here, from governments in the UK, particularly in the UK, and then, all across the media in the US as well.
Well, do you come to the conclusion that it's anything other than a very curiously timed pile-on, and that people are now instigating investigations into this footage which I presume has been circulating for the guts of 18 months? I mean, the performance from November 2023.
I actually wanted to ask.
Go for it.
Why is this now? So this is obviously the Coachella thing happens. There's outrage. There's people like Sharon Osbourne who's like chiming in on it, and we've got all the Coachella stuff, and then it comes after that. So it's like, are we suggesting that people are digging into sort of their past, and what's happening here? Do we think?
Do you think so?
I don't know. I think this did kick off at Coachella, and what happened at Coachella was behind the screen or behind the stage, Kneecap often put up political messages. Kneecap is a political rap group.
They're not politicians.
Yeah.
No one's elected them to be thought leaders.
This is the thing
but
about
they never have pretended to be anything other than that. Like, that's widely known. So if you book them for a gig, you've got to know that they're going to come with some kind of message. Like, surely people know that about them.
There is an element to this where, what did you expect from Kneecap? They've always lived on the edge. The name Kneecap itself is living on the edge. It is designed to be provocative. That's never been a secret. The balaclavas, it's not for middle class.
DJ Provi,
absolutely.
They kind of wear their allegiances pretty firmly,
Hip hop music and punk music, which I'd probably put it into both categories, it will always provoke, it will always offend, it will always instigate conversations which are uncomfortable. And I think the guys from Kneecap would be aware that at some point that they were going to have to answer questions about their stances on things and saying provocative things, which is what happened here. But at Coachella, the message on the screen behind them said, F Israel, free Palestine, which would not be perhaps perceived as a particularly offensive. I mean, people would take issue with the language, but it would not be seen as particularly offensive here. But it was seen as anti-Semitic in the US, where there's a different scale of understanding of things, or there's a different sliding. How you use words in terms of in relation to the state of Israel is perceived perhaps as anti-Semitic there, rather than it's a criticism of a government. Yeah. And the military.
The distinctions
here
that we see, particularly in this island, about Judaism and the state of Israel and Israel's conduct as a state versus Israel's conduct as a Jewish state, is very different here than it is in other parts of the world.
Yeah.
And also as well, I think like you have to remember the context of where they're coming from in terms of where they grew up and what they've lived through and their lives and their family, their connection. I think sometimes, when we talk about Northern Ireland, I think sometimes people who live south of the border, sometimes we're not totally au fait or connected with what people have been through north of the border and the lives that they've lived and the perspective that they come from as well. I think that's a really important thing to remember when you think of Kneecap, is the perspective they're coming from. And also, like, when we look at the situation with Coachella, that's one incident. This other incident is not totally different, but they are completely separate in so many ways.
Certainly are. And I think as well, just to finish the point about this, these are musicians, these are rappers. It reminds me in many ways about in the late 80s and early 90s, you had Ice-T and his song Cop Killer. You had NWA with F the Police saying things like, when I finish, there's going to be a bloodbath of cops in LA, and the huge protests that then stemmed from that sort of language being used in rap music. Now, if you look at NWA, Dr. Dre is a billionaire. He's wheeled out at every corporation in the country. Ice Cube does kids movies. Ice-T has been the longest portrayal of anybody in the TV show, and he's in
That's right,
he's in SVU.
Yeah.
All these guys are very mainstream now, despite the fact that they voiced opinions which were objectionable to certain people in the United States. You are going to get this with music. Now, to talk about what they said and why it has provoked this counter-terror approach in the UK, Hamas and Hezbollah in the UK are prescribed organisations, and voicing support for them, whether that is through emblem, i.e. using Hezbollah flag, or saying up Hamas and Hezbollah, can be deemed a crime by UK police. That is why they say that it merits further investigation. The point about Stephen Amos and Joe Cox, the two murdered MPs. David Amos. Their families are not happy with this, obviously, and killing MPs is something which carries a bit more sharpness, a bit more of emotion. It's a bit more evocative in that part of the world than anywhere else, because would they have seen, the damage that political discourse has caused in terms of inspiring people to actually commit acts of harm and acts of terror, effectively, on members of the British Parliament. Now, they have apologised, as we said, in a very lengthy statement, quite a considered statement to some degrees. Whether or not you think it is whether or not you believe that it is genuine or not, or whether or not you think it goes far enough. The families of the MPs who were killed certainly don't think it goes far enough at this point in time. I think it was the Ames family sort of saying that, look, we appreciate you saying sorry, but saying that this is part of a conspiracy to take you guys down, that doesn't really speak to it being a very genuine apology. I don't know how this one goes away. I don't think it damages the band Kneecap going forward. I think it has already seen them had a number of shows cancelled. As one, the Eden Project in Cornwall has been cancelled. There's been a number of gigs in Germany have been cancelled. At the same time, it has propelled their album to the charts in places like Italy and other parts of the world where it had not charted before. It's a difficult one to get your head around, because it is difficult to not get into, well, where do you stand on this? Do you think that this is right? Is this free speech? As other music acts have got involved, whether that be Massive Attack, Paul Weller, Annie Mac have all put out, a lot of groups, Pulp included as well, saying this is artistic expression. Where you may not agree with it, you may think this is harmful to your taste. Why is this getting more? Why is this being investigated? Why is this being poured over more than literally something which is being accused of and was letter of the law being investigated by the ACG as a war crime at this point in time?
It kind of strikes me that they've almost become totems for, or like a proxy for discussion around the Middle East, is whether you support Kneecap or not. And it's possible to think that Kneecap's approach and the manner in which they spread their message is objectionable or unwelcome, while also generally agreeing with the broad thrust of them. But it's possible to also take the dim view that you can also like Kneecap and not necessarily like the message they preach. You can enjoy their art but not really agree with what they stand for. And like I think it's a sign of the times that people have now kind of reduced it to this boiled down thing of like, well, if you support Kneecap, you support Hamas, or vice versa, when it's not. Like, there's much more nuance to it than that. And like, I still just can't get away from the fact that it's only 3 months since they were longlisted for an Oscar and they were being feted by America's arts community, and now because they put something on lighting on the back of a stage that some people didn't like, that they're now basically being cancelled and apparently being denied a visa for a sold out tour in that same country. Like, that speaks to me, irrespective of the merits or demerits of their message or the way in which it's delivered. Just to me, just looks like a pile-on. There's no other way to get around it.
I would just say that, when you look at the response, say, from Joe Cox's husband, Brendan Cox, he was saying that, he feels it was half an apology. And over which you mentioned that the other families as well feel the same way. I think there's a difference between probably the words that were spoken at Coachella and the way that was delivered. It was probably more of a political statement than those comments previously about the Tory MPs. Like, there is a difference in the tone of them. I know, some of it can be deemed as political activism, some of it can be considered incitement to hatred. There's a difference in the way, like, words have power, and the way that we speak those words has an impact, and the choice of words has an impact. And I think that Kneecap absolutely can continue to move forward, making their art and being, political and activist. I don't think at any point Kneecap probably would have wanted to end up being the story in all of this. I don't think they ever would have wanted to be in a situation where all we're talking about now is the band and the controversy, as opposed to what, as you said, Richard, is happening in Gaza. Certainly don't think it was their motivation. But I think probably, I hate that term, lessons will be learned in terms of the choice of words. I think words are powerful, and the way we use them has to be considered.
I think it'll be interesting to see. They say that they are not going to shy away from the issue of Palestine moving forward. And I think it would be a great shame if acts stopped talking about things which they are politically inspired or politically important to do so. It has been a hallmark of music all the way through. Since the revolutionary years, and we talk about even artists from the 50s, 60s onwards, politics has been a huge part of music. I would actually direct people to read the statement on Massive Attack's Instagram account. I think that's probably the most considered statement I've seen on this. So it's going to be interesting to see which way this one turns. They certainly say they're not backing down, while they've apologised and said they were not in any way saying they supported Hamas or Hezbollah, or that they would condone the attacks on MPs in the UK. It is going to be interesting to see where this one all turns.